which are really interesting from a consumer perspective. If you look at things like the peer-to-peer file sharing networks, which are kind of like the ideal record store in a way, except you don't have to pay for that, is because it is like they are still like the place where you basically find almost all the material, even if it's against the intention of the providers of the material, but you can't pay, like official businesses can't really compete with them because it's so burdensome to get the copyright. Or to get permission by all the users. Nobody will give, like, there's not a single record store on the internet at the moment which has the permission of all the users, which is kind of bizarre because, for example, for radio, when radio came along, there's no such thing that radio stations actually have to ask every possible musician or every possible copyright holder for permission to play a song on the radio. There is an exception there which basically says you pay a fixed fee to a collecting society, something like GEMA in Germany or Buma Stemra here, and then you have the right to play the entire repertoire. It's just said like it is impossible, it would create an impossible situation if you have to basically go and ask every single artist for permission. So we turn the system around, we just fix a mandatory rate for access and then you can pick and choose. So this is something which has been discussed around the internet also as a solution for the problem of actually or for basically solving the problem created by easy access to pirated material and fairly difficult access to legal sources of music. Now, in order to understand, and I'm basically like still want to talk about Creative Commons, not really the color. I mean, it's readable like that as well, so different color intended. Oh. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So in this situation, so we found ourselves in this situation where basically everything is protected, and it assumes, it also assumes one core thing, that people who produce so because they want to earn money with that. And that is probably something for a lot of you and definitely a lot of people who produce on the internet, which has changed. If you look at what's called user-generated content at the moment, is basically like an explosion of creativity on the internet, which has taken place by people who don't produce photographs or videos or write texts because they have the intention to earn money with that. There's lots of other intentions. Some of them is actually you want to get read or you want to get your message around. Some people only want a little bit of recognition. Some people just publish because they publish. It becomes almost normal. And copyright law in this sense doesn't really recognize these kind of motivations for production enough. And this is where then Creative Commons steps in. But to look back, for probably most of you in the room is not here in the room, and probably even most people here at Picnic, the problem is not necessarily that their work gets read or watched or listened to too much, e.g. there is like illicit copying and they like people gain access. But for most people producing, like the central problem is basically, or the central dissatisfaction with what you do is basically that it's not watched enough or not read enough. And creative, like copyright basically implies or applies this principle of having to ask permission first for it to get distributed, which is of course detrimental. If like somebody has to ask permission before they can use your material, they will probably not. So the idea of Creative Commons to a certain extent was within this system of permission-based culture of copyright to introduce something where you give permission up front, where you give permission in the beginning of the process and then hope that this will enable the work to actually get spread around and get used much more. There is so the current situation with copyright limits authors who want to share information and want to share works, want to get the stuff out there. And it also limits access to information, especially for so-called orphan works. If you think about like the the statement I made in the beginning, where it's basically that your work written right now is protected for another 140 years from this moment on. What happens if you in 20 years do something completely different? You can't be found by anyone reusing your work anymore, because under copyright law, they need to get, somebody else who wants to use this needs to get permission. If they can't find you, they can't permission, so the work can't be used, which is at the moment a fairly big problem for especially for big archival projects which go into and archive material from the past, and sort of lots of libraries can't basically, lots of libraries, for example, can't trace back the writers of books which have been published in the beginning of the 19th century, or even like towards the end of the 19th century, to get permission to make digital copies of the books and then put them on internet, even if they are available in the library and the people don't care anymore. Same thing, and even maybe even more dramatic with the audiovisual archives. Like there's in most of the European countries, there's big projects at the moment trying to digitize the archives of the public broadcasters and make them available online, which of course is a fairly huge and fairly important, for example, educational resource, or also for cultural production could be a great resource. Governments put lots of money into the digitization of that material before it decays. But the biggest problem is, like, lots of the people who produced like television programs in the 1970s simply can't be found anymore and can't be asked for permission to make that actually available. And one would assume that probably most people who do other stuff right now, or who produce something for public broadcasters in the sense of documentaries, who want to get a message across, probably wouldn't even be asked for permission, but they have to be asked for permission. So let's just skip through this. So what is Creative Commons then? And this might get a little bit like, for the people who know, Creative Commons recognized, or was set up by a number of people in the early years of this century. One of the main funder is Professor Lawrence Lessig, and basically comes, which a US law professor who had been involved in a number of high-profile legal cases, which basically went around the duration of copyright. And when the duration of copyright was extended again and again and again, he said, like, okay, we have to provide something within the context of copyright which allows people who are not insisting, who don't want this ever-extending protection, to govern access to their works within this system. And so they sat down and basically said, like, okay, what can we do about that? We can come up with a set of licenses, which is something which had been which had been used for a longer period before this in software circles. People of you who have heard about open source software or free software, basically there's the idea you give others access to your software, give them the right to participate in your software project, in the order of hoping like that you have more developers and can develop more quickly. And that required also like a legal construct which gave everybody the right to actually contribute and then use what they collectively produced. And there were so-called open source licenses, which work from the general assumption that since you have the copyright and you have to ask for permission, you can like also proactively basically say, as long as you adhere to these principles, you can use this code, you can copy this code, you can make this, you can distribute this software freely. And so these people who set up Creative Commons basically said, we need something like this, which seems to work for software. We need something like this for other works of creative authorship. And so they came up with the Creative Commons licenses, and they were launched on 16 December 2002. This presentation or this slide is a little bit older. We're currently having these licenses available in 47 countries. So this is something which was first in the US and then spread fairly quickly around the world. These licenses were always adapted to like the local copyright law, because they are based on copyright law. There are certain references within them to copyright law, and they are different for every country. And Creative Commons Netherlands, for example, the thing I work for is here in the Netherlands is a collaboration of the organization I work for, Knowledge Land, Waag Society, and the Institute for Information